Yes, just a little hashgacha pratis over here. Last night I was in Toronto, and my phone rings, and I pick it up, and someone says, "I got you." I said, "Yes, you did." And he says, "I had your telephone number, missing one number." That's good. Of course, the one number will be 9 because he started from 1, right, all the way down. He said, and I got you on the second call. He said, the first time I called, I got somebody in Canada, he tells me. He says, well, you also got me in Canada, by the way. You see, it was Bashert, you should call Canada twice. He said, is that true? I said, I'll show you my roaming charges. We're talking to you right now. Okay. So like we said, Hashgacha Pratis is there. You just have to look for it. For example, as we continue the continuing saga of my notebook. So the notebook we had last week that was cut in half. So here's the problem with that notebook, and that's why I stopped using it. Wherever I would put it down in yeshiva, somebody would come running to return it to me. Which was a big problem, because it was never there when I put it down, because somebody went looking for me to return it, which means I never had it. I couldn't put it down anywhere. So I needed a less identifiable notebook. So this is the 4th generation iPod that I have now. The one that we're working with. Again, it has all of the apps and links in the right places, so we shall see how it's going to work. It's really nice when people know there are halachos in Hashavas Aveda, when you are supposed to pick something up and when you are not supposed to pick something up. The idea that if you pick it up to return it, all you're causing is the person not nevish when he comes back and it's not there. Which is always an important inyan to remember when it comes to chesed. Like that Boy Scout that came back and everyone had to report a good deed. And he said, they all went out to do a good deed. He comes back an hour later and he says he helped an old man across the street. They said, what took an hour? He said, well, he didn't want to go. He was kicking and screaming and yelling until I carried him across the street, It took time. It takes time. So, the emes is, when we come up to Shemayim after 120 years, so there's a pinkus, there's a notebook. What is the notebook that we have when we come up to Shemayim? What will it look like? Will it be a half a notebook? Will it be a whole notebook? Will it be taka in an iPod? And the answer is neither. Because the notebook that we have when we come up to Shemayim will be ourselves. It'll be our very essence. Our neshama speaks for itself. In other words, one look at our neshama, and you can tell by looking at us what we did down here on this world. Essentially, it's like fingerprints. Just like we can understand that you can't send a shliach to do the fingerprints for you, and you can't hide the fingerprints. They are who you are. There are prints in our neshama as to what we do. Every mitzvah, every hour, every aveira, and the Chavetz Chaim talks about this at great length, and he says, and the kind of shamash and asata be tahiri ata v'ratza ata yitzarta ata nefachtani ata meshamer v'kibi ata asid litla. And the warning over here is that remember when we get up to Shemayim, we're going to have to live with the reality of our actions. In other words, who we are is a metzias. It's going to speak for itself. Down here in this world, you can dray a heen and dray a hair and explain why you're a tzaddik and explain why you had to steal and you had to embarrass the other person, shkoyach, and you did it totally l'shem shemayim. Up there, it won't work because there's no room for excuses. We are who we are. That's the metzias, as we've discussed earlier. The Chavetz Chaim discusses it as well. Certain mitzvahs represent our wardrobe. Certain mitzvahs represent our clothes. Certain mitzvahs represent the essence of our neshama. So notebooks and shemayim are not necessary because we kind of speak for ourselves. When Moshe Rabbeinu said, "Mecheni na misifrecha," some Sefer says that Moshe Rabbeinu said, "I am willing to totally." Not be who I am. In other words, if because of my metzias is so distant from Klal Yisrael, because of their chait, so then change me. Change me. I'm willing to drop down to where they are. So when you go through passport control, they hold up the passport, they look at you back and forth, and you try to tell your kids not to make funny faces, then it's not a good time. They're the wrong guys to start up with. They have to look at you. So there's another system with fingerprints. You don't have to look at the person with a finger you can't hide. It's your fingers. It's your metzias. There even is another system with retina prints, where they look into your eye, and every eye has a certain print. And I think that's scary, because when we get up to Shemayim, they're going to look into our eyes, and it's going to be very clearly recorded what our eyes saw down here in this world. The Torah wasn't given to angels, but it's going to be recorded what attempt we made to try to keep, and I speak to myself also if I say, to try to keep our eyes b'kedusha. It's not something you can hide. When I was taking my mother for treatments for radiation, so the technician told me that he worked in Saudi Arabia once, and that one of the princes actually sent one of his Yesem Misharsim to take, he didn't have time to come. He wanted him to do the CAT scan on him instead. That obviously is not going to work. We are who we are. The schar mitzvah, schar aveira. That means the schar mitzvah is that we become a chefza shal mitzvah in Shemayim. We become a metzias of mitzvah. We create a tangible reality. That besides the fact, as the Nefesh HaChaim explains, we create malachim that defend us. In schar aveira, we create aveiros that we create aveira malachim that prosecute against us through the nature of what we do. That's why the Chavetz Chaim says that through Lashon Hara, it's the worst, because every aveira malach prosecutes. Every mitzvah malach defends you. But an aveira malach that is created through speaking Lashon Hara, that's tough, because he's created through prosecution. So in other words, if I wear shatnez, there's a malach that prosecutes against me. But if I speak Lashon Hara, so he's an expert, he's a specialist in prosecution, because he's created through your prosecution. We don't realize the metzias of what we create. I think that he also brings that in Shemayim, even when a malach comes and says, so-and-so has to be punished for what he did, we don't accept an eid echad. So when you come and you speak Lashon Hara, and you say, that person, he deserves to be, they take your eidus and they're mitzaref it with him, and as a result, the punishment is executed. And the same is true in regard to reward. And one of the Kadmonim brings this, that in Shemayim they say, so-and-so deserves to get rich. So-and-so deserves to have a Yeshua, to have a child, to find a shidduch. But they need a second aid to confirm it. And when you say, I wish so-and-so, daven for him, I wish, he should find a Yeshua. I wish he has a shidduch. So they take your words and they connect it to his words. And what's going to happen is we're going to come up after 120 years and we're going to be shown, you killed so-and-so. I what? You caused so-and-so to lose his money. Me! And on the other side of the coin, we're going to be told, you saved this person's life, and you caused this person to be able to breathe that night, and you created this family, all on the basis of what we say. That's the reality. So there are no notebooks in Shemayim. They're on the Shama prints. Now, the Baba Sali, there were big moifsim, open miracles that he used to say, and somebody once asked him, how do you get Ruach HaKodesh? I love those questions. Right? How do you become a tzaddik? How do you get Ruach HaKodesh? Yes. It's by being a tzaddik. So he said that what your eyes can see, everyone's eyes can see that. If your eyes don't see the wrong things, then they see the right things. So he says, what my eyes see more than someone else is only because I protected my eyes from seeing the wrong things. He said, you would have been on the same level. You could have been on it. There was a Yid, his name was Rabbi Pilchik. He was here at the turn of the century, and he worked as a peddler. And he worked on his own. That's after he tried to work. We've said the story many times. Every Shabbos he lost his job, and he would come in Monday morning. Where were you? And he always had a standard text. Monday morning they would line up, and the boss would sit there on a swivel chair, puffing on a cigar. One of those old telephones, the rotary telephones on the big hook. He thought the world is his. He has it all there. And he's turning from side to side, and he walks in with an old typewriter, with a ribbon there. And where were you? And each guy would say an excuse. I had a stomach ache, I wasn't feeling well. He used to come and he goes, where I was, it was Shabbos. And I ate shom, and I ate kugel, and I sang zmiros. That's where I was. He says, yeah? And I danced. You could dance outside now. Okay, because you're fired. He says, I am going to dance outside. He says, why? He says, because in another 5 days is Shabbos again. He goes, what do you know about it? And so then he became a peddler. He said that he once had a story, I think this is what I heard, like similar to an Asayin of Yosef HaTzadik, and Imamish jumped off a porch in his peddling things. And in his older years, they brought a doctor. They brought him to a doctor because he had trouble with his eyes. And the doctor stared and stared into his eyes. He said, you can look and look into those eyes, because those eyes with Mesiras Nefesh didn't see the things they weren't supposed to be. So it's important to stress the positive aspect of this, that when we're going to go through a fingerprinting in Shemayim, and our neshama prints, and they're going to look into our eyes, they're not only going to see the things that we ought not to have looked at, they're also going to see the things, the cleanliness, they're going to see the kedusha during those times that we closed our eyes. During those times, we didn't look at what we were supposed to not look at, or we didn't say what we weren't supposed to say, we didn't listen to what we weren't supposed to listen to. That also is imprinted on us. And as the Steipler writes in many of his letters, you should know that one doesn't cancel out. If 1,000 times a person looked at the thing that he ought not to have looked at, and once he didn't, he still gets the reward for the once he didn't. There's no point in saying, what's the point anyway? I lost this game, it's checkmate anyway. There's no checkmate. The Talmud Devar also says that Kodesh Baruch Hu doesn't cancel mitzvahs for aveiros or aveiros for mitzvahs. So naturally, it all depends how you do the mitzvah. If a guy does things very dryly, and he comes home and just makes kiddush and whatever, and something that's barely wine, without cheshik, without love, and goes through the whole Shabbos, because there's one shita that this is okay, there's one shita that asks, hey, what's with your tzitzis? There's nothing hanging there. They all got ripped. That is one shita that it's okay. There's one shita this is okay. They say he's going to come up to Olam Haba. They're going to introduce him to his place. He's going to see what I worked for my entire life. You see some dried out palm tree, some schwitz that you walked in and the air conditioner seems like it's on, and there's some beautiful water with a leaky rowboat and a bunch of worms around, and when it comes time for the food, the waiter will be an old man and he's going to come in with some grumpy voice. What do you want now? He says, what's with the food? And he brings you some grilled cheese from your yeshiva days, all the way then, some of the leftover sandwiches that nobody wanted to eat, and you call in the malach, they say, this is Olam Haba, this is food, this is a pool, this is a schwitz, this is a palm tree, and they're going to say, well, according to one shita, it is. Okay, that's the way it's going to work. That's the way it's going to work. What they say, his grandmother was in a hotel someplace down there in Miami, and they said the family got together, they thought they're going to make her happy. She was complaining and complaining. All she kept saying, the food has poison. Poison. And besides that, is everything okay? Yeah, they give so little, such small portions, According to one shita, it's okay. According to one shita, it's okay. But we have to understand that we are dressing ourselves before a wedding. Right? You look into the mirror, if you're not supposed to look into the mirror, well, your wife definitely does, and we want to be our best for the picture. We want to be our best for that one picture that the photographer is going to take. So Kal V'Chomer, Uben B'Noishel Kal V'Chomer, the picture that lasts forever. The Schar Mitzvah and the Schar Aveira of who we are. Sefer Kav Yashar brings, others bring it also from Kadmonim, the story that there was a man who lived alone on some top of a mountain, and the only sefer that he had was a Masechtas Chagiga. And when he died, there was a woman that came dressed in black and started screaming. His body is laying there, come, 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 come. And the Chaber Kadisha came running up, and there was a Messiah that was Masechtas Chagiga. There was Malubish in a crying woman for him. It's a Metzias. We create realities with our Torah, we create realities with our mitzvah, and you can't lie. You can't lie because it's us. It's our fingerprints, it's our retina prints, it's our neshama prints. Right? Guy gets on the scale, the scale doesn't lie. He says, you're going to, on the car, the odometer, people drive it backwards. You get on the scale, what are you going to do? The guy says, gets on the scale, he tries to hold his stomach in. The guy says, someone tells him that's not going to help. He goes, well, I have to see the numbers. He says, I have no other way of getting them. It's going to be where it is. It's going to be where it is. Now, the Emes Taich is that Ata Chaynein Li Adam Das. Ata Chaynein Li Adam Das, meaning to say that you're through our Das, of the understanding of what life is all about, so we get a tzura of Adam. Our Adam is created by our understanding of what we want to do with our lives. As Agav, I think the old Dr. Breuer used to teach, Ata Chaynein Li Adam Das, that he doesn't want that the Adam should outlive the Das. In other words, he doesn't want to be on this world if his mind is not clear. What's interesting is that I think he was nifter in his very high 90s, and to say how clear he was, the story is that he was going to be nifter on Shabbos. He called someone over and asked that they put a piece of challah in his pocket to, as concerned that a dead body is muktzah and they shouldn't have to move it, and the lach is metaltal and mes al yedei kicker atinik. So if you want to understand what that means, person's mispal la'avta chaynein liyadam das. And that a person, the more Shmon Esrei we daven with kavana, the more we at least try, that it's with heart, that's what we're creating for ourselves. We're creating a world around. If you daven Shmon Esrei, the way flight attendants give those safety instructions, you know what I mean? Especially when it's not on the video and the guy comes out with, there's a recorded voice and he's trying to keep up with it, and he's like, still with a seatbelt, and it goes, and if the cabin pressure breaks and you have oxygen, you just put it over your nose and throws the seatbelt down, grabs out this oxygen thing, right? And if you have children, he just throws the whole thing away, It's very different. Why they say the guy gets out there and he's doing this for I don't know how many thousand flights already. He gets up there and he goes, if you don't know how a seatbelt works by now, you don't deserve to be on the plane, okay? And but if there's a loss of cabin pressure, you put this thing over your thing, and if you have a kid, you put it on yours first and then the kid, and if you have two kids, decide which one you love better, okay? And by the way, gather all your belongings, and because if not, it gets distributed amongst the flight attendants, and don't leave anything behind, and please don't leave behind your spouse and children, that for sure. Now, when the captain turns the seatbelt off, you can walk around the cabin, but please, by all means, stay in the cabin. Do not get out anywhere else. Somebody told me, he was on a flight, and the captain, that's hi, this is your captain speaking, we hope you have a pleasant flight, calling from the cockpit, just like to let you know, I'm Captain so-and-so, this is my co-pilot Captain so-and-so, and we are both armed with 45 semi-automatics, so if you have any intention of coming into the cockpit, you should know it won't be easy. Okay. We don't think, so we daven that way, we learn that way, we don't realize that every single day of our life is another opportunity to recreate ourselves. Somebody told me, I hope this story is not true, that by Maftir there was so much talking in his Beis Medrash that one guy got up and he said, I'm going to try to see if anyone chaps. And he went, he just came from the bathroom, and he went, and they called him up to Haftarah. He goes, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher yatzeh Sodom v'Chachma v'Ravai nekav. And he said, nobody realized. That's what he said. I am not going to tell you which shul that supposedly was. But that's it. The guy was the story of the guy, middle of that, guy's walking in a beautiful forest. It's gorgeous. Tropical rainforest. It's so beautiful. The coral reefs. All of a sudden someone has the nerve to zets him across the chest. He wants to kill him, and he realizes he got up to Slachlanu, and he woke himself up, and he put himself in. That's it. Right? As I've told you many times, the guy davens, he has his davening on his iPod, he davens. At one point he gets like the impatience, he just highlights the whole thing and presses send and walks away. Right? There is no parasha in the Torah that has more psukim than the parasha of the Mishkan. That is, you have Parasha Trumah and the Big Day Kuna, right? And then Tetzava, Elam parts and Tetzava parts and Kisisa, then the entire V'Yakal Pekudei. And isn't it ironic that the Mishkan is like, what are we supposed to do with it? L'maisa, with the Mishkan. We don't even have a Mishkan. We have, even what we're going to have is a Beis HaMikdash, not the Mishkan. So why is a kid going to be up this Thursday night, breaking his head over these Rashis with the Urias Izim and the Krushim? It was a one thing. Often the Gemara says, Hochasol Mashiach, what's in the Geya? And here, there's no parsha in the Torah. You have halachos that we live by day in, day out. Chayve krisis. Halachos of what's kosher, what's not kosher, that the Gemara darshans from a kutzay shel yud, from the tip of a yud, and here you have these long parashiyos about something which will chas v'shalom appear if you don't understand it to be insignificant. The Mishkan is not insignificant, because as the Ramah explains in the Sefer Torah Sa'ila, our bodies really is the Mishkan. Okay? Our mind is the Kodesh HaKadoshim. And the Nefesh HaChaim explains that, there's the terrible story the Gemara says in Masechtas Gittin that Titus Arasha burst into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, stabbed the Paroiches, and the blood was cascading out of the Paroiches. Savar Shahara Gasatzma, he believed in what he did, that he did what he thought he did, and then he proceeded to open up a Sefer Torah in the Kodesh HaKadoshim and to be over the worst Aveira on that Kodesh HaKadoshim. Says the Nefesh HaChaim that Titus did not do as much damage as a person who willfully allows his mind to dip into the bad machshavos. I say that because the Torah says, as the Svanim Esvarim say, we know that we're human, Torah knows we're human beings. The issue isn't what we think about, the issue is what we try not to think about, or how we expose ourselves to the right areas, because where we are depends who we are. The Mordechai Gavad from Meir Shapiro, the Kruvim in this week's Parasha, right? They face each other. It's the epitome of Kedusha. And then you have the Kruvim, which are the Lat HaCheref HaMesapeches, that stand outside of the Gan Eden, and they're the Malachim that if anyone walks in, then your head gets sliced off. So what are Kruvim? So he says, Kruvim are little children. It depends where you raise them. You raise them in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, it's the Makar of Kedusha. If you raise them outside of Gan Eden and you expose them, these same kids turn into the Malach, the most vicious and dangerous Malach. So says the Nefesh HaChaim that Titus had limited power to effect damage, even though what he did was so horrible. But when a person engages bedafka and doesn't attempt to purify his machshava, he says that's worse, because your mind is the Kodesh HaKadosh. And you are a mishkan. The machshava of a person is a kodesh hakadashim. You know, there's much in the sugya, in the sechtes midas, and it's also mentioned in other places in Shas, of workers that were suspended in to fix things in the kodesh hakadashim. So that the remez is that the Rabbi Shalom has set things up for us to be able to matayir our machshava. That we have the possibility and the capability to be able to correct things. And the Rabbi Shalom says, I know it's not perfect. I know you're a human being. What I want from you is to try. I want from you is to try. Like the story we said many times, the Gemara tells us Rabbi Elazar Rav Shimon was walking and he met an absolutely disgusting, despicable, ugly-looking, horrific individual. And what do you do when you meet such a person? He said to him, you're ugly. And that man answered, Lech le'umen she'asuni. Go to the person that, go to the craftsman that made me. So he followed him, he wanted to ask him mechila, he didn't want to be meichel him, and finally, when the Rabbi Elazar Rav Shimon came to town, everyone came running out, lit the lanterns, the lights, tzaddik bala here. He said, he's the tzaddik, we're in big trouble then. So he said, please be meichel him, so at the end he was meichel him. How could this be? Is this conceivable that Rabbi Elazar Rav Shimon would go and say that to someone? That's not something that, I remember you sit on a bus, and when I was one of my little kids, I still remember it today, and a man walks onto the bus, and he's shall we say, a sprite Yiddishkeit a little bit, and he takes up 3 seats as he sits down, and he goes, Tati, jena mensch is azoi. Right? Little kids say that, but a grown-up will go and say that to a person? Even though they say from what little kids or people that are deranged say, you know what someone else thinks, by the way. But how could it be? So my father used to say, I think he said it from Rav Tzaddik, that we mentioned it many times, that Rabbi Elazar Rav Shimon was not referring to physical deformities. He was saying in Ruchnius, he saw his Aveiros. He said, you're so ugly. What did the man answer? Lech le'umen she'asuni. Go to the one who created me. So that's, if we're talking Ruchnius here, so it's up to you to think what you're watching, what you're looking at, why you're thinking that. The answer is because he meant to say, listen, you may have Ruach HaKodesh. You may have such clarity that my mind is transparent. You see what I'm thinking about. But the nesiyonus that I have, the tests that I have, or how much I'm trying to stay clean in my mind, that only one Rabbi Shalom knows. That only the Rabbi Shalom who created me and knows what inevitably I was exposed to, he's the only one that knows that. So it's not that HaKadosh Baruch Hu understands who we are, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to try. So our mind is the Kodesh HaKadoshim. The Heichel, continues the Ramah, is the Leiv, is the heart. The menorah is the Chachmas HaTorah in our heart. The Parnasa is the craving that our heart has to provide for ourselves and our family. The outside of the Heichel, the Mizbeach, that's the digestive system of the human body. And he even goes as far as to say the Trumas Hadeshen, Achsim Sefer also says that that's the waste of the digestive system and so on. So the Mishkan is a Kuma Shlema of who the person is. The others explain it, that's why we are Mispal Ata Chaynin Li Adam Das, that you are creating us. And Chachma, that's the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Bina, that's the Heichel, that's the Leiv. Chachma is the Machshava. Bina is the Bina Yisera that a woman has. The Maven Dover Mitach Dover, how we apply the Chachma to ourselves. That's the Cheshik that we have. And the digestive system, that's Das. Das is Ruach HaKodesh. Das is also the Koyach that we have to want to connect to certain things. The Ratzon, the Tshuka that we have. So the Mizbeach, the eating, represents our taivas, it represents what we do with it. So either way, the Mishkan, the Va'asili Migdash V'Shachanti B'Saycha means we are building a Mishkan. With every mitzvah, with every Aveira that we do, we create a Mishkan. And we have to do our best. Once heard from one of the Chabad Rebbes, he wrote to a person who says he's struggling with his machshavos, so he wrote as follows. Ein hakavana, I quoted the Lashon, lilchaim im machshava leitayva. The kavana is not to battle a machshava that is not good. You don't go to war against the machshava that's not good. Because then don't think about a pink elephant, you know what I mean? Like, rak l'siach das mimena, the way is to be mesiach das from it. If a little bit of light pushes away a lot of darkness, the more a person engages in the right things, so the less of an asayin a person has. Or is the art of Torah. Oira means when you become a clay kibble to be able to receive that Torah. And to become a clay kibble to receive the Torah is to believe in yourself, to believe that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants my Torah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants my mitzvahs. Now, so again, why the Mishkan more so than the Beis HaMikdash? The major part of what the Torah teaches us about the Mishkan is the fact that it was constantly taken apart and reassembled. It was taken apart and reassembled. Even during the Shivas Yimei Amuyim, that's what they were practicing. It seems that they were more busy taking it apart and reassembling it than it was the actual Mishkan itself. Because that is the nature of the Mishkan. The nature of the Mishkan in our lives is to say, we blew it, start again. You blew it, start again. So it's interesting. So the Mishkan, so many psukim about the Mishkan, and finally you come to the end of Shemais, where the Torah wraps up the story of the Mishkan. And what's the last thing that the Torah says about the Mishkan? Well, so again, we're talking about some sense of restrictions over here. And when the Anan lifted itself, the clouds lifted themselves above the Mishkan, they moved. And if the Anan didn't move, then they couldn't move. Now, if the Anan stopped, they had to stop. So do you understand? This is the Nisayan of life. There are times we would love to be close to Hashem, but we're struggling. There are times you take apart the Mishkan. There are times the Mishkan stops. And there's no such a thing as blowing it to the point where after my machshava, forget about it. What my eyes saw, forget about it. It's not true. That's why the Mishkan has this power to be taken apart and to be reassembled. Some phones, they freeze. What do? Turn it off. Can't turn it off because it froze. So what do? Take out the battery, right? Put the battery back in, and sometimes things go back to normal. Sometimes they don't, depending what's wrong with the phone. But very often, that's what happens. In other words, the Mishkan has the power to disconnect. And that's the nimshal. That in our ruchnius, as bad as we blew it, there is a way for us to take ourselves apart ruchniistic and to recorrect. And to use perhaps a serious mashal is chas v'sholom yishakin. We have a lot of Atzala people there. But you're shocking a heart. What are you doing? You're actually stopping the heart, right? You're stopping the heart so that it starts again the right way. And that's the power of the Mishkan as it connects to us. That there are times in life we blew it. Hashem says, take yourself apart and start again. So how do I take myself apart? Where do I begin? You begin when you face situations of Mesiras Nefesh and you're willing to accept the matzah. Someone told me a great story today. That in the Brisk Rav, once they came to him, there was some in Brisk. The Haskalah, the reform movement was like printing letters and letters against the Rabbanim, all sorts of lies, and the Rabbanim were striking back with letters, and there was letters here, letters there, on the wall, back in Yerushalayim, post a letter, 2 seconds, the other guy goes, post another letter on top of it, another guy posts another letter on top of it, and of course, the only one who really gains by this are the printers, who are constantly going, come on, keep going, both sides, let's go. And so they printed, the Maskilim printed some terrible lies about the Rabbanim. So they printed back, we'll tell you who the Maskilim are. And the Brisk Rav was very makbid and brisk, they should bring him the things to read. So it was Friday afternoon, they brought him to make sure it's written properly. So they brought him the thing, he said, he doesn't just want one paper, he wants the entire stack. So what do you need the entire stack for? It's all the same, he wants the entire stack. They brought the entire stack, he read it, he said, Zeyer gut, written very well. Answered pointedly to the Zach, great, and they're ready to... The other guys are out there with the tape, they're wrapping on the entire town. We're going to plaster this town with it. And the Brisk Rav takes the whole stack and he walks in. The back room, they said, Rebbe, we got to move. It's like almost Shabbos. He said, I'm not giving it out now. He says, at this point, you're going to send everyone out to plaster it. They're going to wind up plastering it after the shkia. No, we really got to get this out. This is like important. And we finally got something that you approve of. He said, no, but the Eibishter made it right before Shabbos. We're not supposed to put it out. So they said, through a guy, no, nothing doing. It's not going out. At the end, there was a major turnaround in town. Because what happened was that the letter that the Maskilim put out was so nasty. And the feeling of the people were, look at the Rabbanim, they didn't even answer back because it was Shabbos. You see how real they are. See how these guys are. That the whole tide of the town turned because of this. You know, there are times in our life we have to disassemble ourselves. It's working so different than what we think. You know, things don't work our way. Kadosh Baruch Hu is disassembling us. You know, a bunch of people told me a story about their daughters trying to get to certain seminaries, and we're not going to mention names here, or boys getting into certain yeshivas, and they were turned down for whatever reason. The world comes to an end. It's not the world's coming to an end. There are times in our life when Kadosh Baruch Hu says, stop, I'm readjusting. Where you think you're going is not your best to tell us. The Kadosh Baruch Hu is guiding us. So I had a friend, Rabbi Yankel Mashinsky, Zecher Tzadik L'Vracha. He used to teach like this. Mishenichnes Adar Ma'arvin B'Simcha. In Yiddish, what does the word Adar mean? Adar Ahin, Adar Aheh. Either this way or the other way. He says, Mishenichnes Adar. Someone comes into life. Either I'll be here, I'll be there. I'll come home, I'll try to apologize. Either my apology will be accepted, or I'll get a frying pan on my head. Adar Ahin, Adar Aheh. I'll try, I'll do whatever I am. Where am I going to be for Shabbos? And he used to say it himself. Either it'll be home or it'll be in the hospital. Mishenichnes Adar, if your attitude is Adar Ahin, whatever's going to be is going to be. Whatever Hashem wants to, that's where I'm going to be. So Marvin B'Simcha, you'll always be happy. Mishenichnes of is a lashon of taiva, what you want. Le'ava, I know it got to be this way. You have it all figured out. Memaitin B'Simcha. Then you're definitely, the simcha in your life is going to be diminished. Now, the Mishkan could be taken apart and reconstructed. The Beis HaMikdash could not. The Beis HaMikdash was there. The first Beis HaMikdash had a tremendous amount of Kedusha to it. But it ran into problems, right? Zechariah and Navi, they threw the stones at him and they killed him in the Mishkan. And later Menashe came and he put a cell in the Heichel. And the problem with the first Beis HaMikdash, meaning to say this was the plan, is that because it had so much Kedusha in it, it was so sensitive to any type of chil, the Kedusha left. Like the Meshech Chacham explains, it says, Ad Yavar Amcha Hashem, Ad Yavar Amzu Kanisa. Ad Yavar Amcha Hashem Zu Biyah Rishayna, that's the first Beis HaMikdash. Because they had Hashem's name, so boom, as soon as the things weren't right, the Kedusha left it. The second Beis HaMikdash did not have as much Kedusha, but that Kedusha stayed. Kedusha Rishayna was Kitchel L'Shaita, V'loi Kitchel L'Aslavi. Kedusha Shni was Kitchel L'Shaita, as you can't walk today, right, on the other side of the Kaisel, you're not allowed to go there. Some don't even touch the Kaisel. That Kedusha is there. Why? Because it was at a lower level of Kedusha, it didn't have Hashem's name, it wasn't so sensitive to Kedusha. So therefore that Kedusha never left it. There are times in our life where we feel, I don't have the emunah, I don't have the ruach, I'd love to have ruach HaKodesh, I'd love to have that inspiration. Because Baruch Hu says if you had that level, it would be so sensitive to Tumah, boom, you would lose it. We have to have a lesser level and sometimes struggle with our emunah and struggle with our machshavos, because then we create the kind of kedusha that is there, that is always going to be there. Rabbi Baruch of Garlitz, the Sanzerov son, once said, "Do you want to be Mashiach?" His father said to him. He said, "No, I don't want to be Mashiach." So his father, the Heilige Sanzerov, said, "Why don't you want to be Mashiach?" He says, "Because I'm a Sanzer Chassid. If I'm going to become Mashiach, all the other Chassidim from the different Chassidus are not going to be against Mashiach. So why should I want to be Mashiach?" He said, "They're not going to have any shaykhs with Mashiach." I think that he hit the nail on the head, which could be the reason that Mashiach did not come yet, that it's not here. Remember, someone told me they had a kid in camp that was like, I know, it goes back a long time ago, so I don't think it's identifiable, but I remember this mother came with a kid. I was in a certain camp, and this kid was huge. But huge, I'm telling you. I mean, his t-shirts were extra husky large, and he had two of them connected together. And the mother said, he must have skim milk. He must have skim milk. Do you realize? The doctor said this is dangerous. I mean, the doctor told me that. You know, he must have skim milk. It was very hard to get skim milk. And the waiters were giving you a hard time about it. And this kid, he was a human vacuum cleaner. Most of the kids leave most of the lunch there. He would finish his portion, and he would literally, the busboys had nothing to do. He would clean off table after table after table after table, just any rim, the crusts of the pizza or the leftover parts of dishes, or the kids eat out the middle part of the bread and they leave the other side. He was just, boom, like a catfish at the bottom of a tank. It eats everything up, you know. So at the top of that, and they would go to the waiter, we need skim milk. Yeah, that's your problem, skim milk, right? Then the mother would come, look at him, I told you he has to have skim milk, you know. We don't know where we have to fix ourselves. But life presents obstacles. We wonder why. Why is this not happening? Why do I have Menasyanis, Shalom Bayis, and Parasha? The Rabbi Shalom is sometimes disassembling us to real things. So I remember somebody told me that they went on a trip once, and the bus started smoking or something. He goes, ooh, this kid said, I wish the bus breaks down. But why do you want the bus to break down? Because his sister went on a trip and the bus broke down, and instead of going snow tubing, they took them for pizza and ice cream. So he wants the bus to break down. You know what I mean? The Mishkan is mevatel ourselves in a way. It represents in the course of life when things aren't going our way. Not ruchnius and not gashmius. The Rebbeinu Shem knows when to disassemble us, because we have to constantly disassembling ourselves and reassembling ourselves. Now, Achashverosh marched around in the Big Day Kahuna. Right? He put on the Big Day Kahuna and he marched around with it. Him and his predecessors and Belshazzar and all the way up, they had an obsession that Golus is limited. They were very frightened when they thought of the idea that after 70 years it's going to be over and they're going to come back. So when Belshazzar saw that 70 years are over, he makes this huge party and he has all the kalim of the Beis HaMikdash there, and all of a sudden he sees the handwriting on the wall, and there was that whole incident, as you know, and Daniel comes out and he reads it and he says, Mana Mana Takla Parson, and he says afterwards, Belshazzar gets killed that night. Because he ordered anyone that leaves, anyone tries to come in, should be shot. He left to come to the bathroom, he came back, and he wound up being a victim of his own order. I would say by mistake, but it wasn't by mistake. They knew it was him, they did it anyway. But Al Kopanim, so right, then Achashverosh comes along, because he made a cheshbon, the 70 years are over. And Achashverosh makes a different cheshbon when the 70 years are over, and he gets all excited. He's wearing the begotten of the Kohen Gadol, and nothing's happening. You know, he doesn't die, he doesn't see any handwriting on the wall, because Achashverosh probably couldn't read anyway, but... So the Svarim say, again, Belshazzar took out the Kalim of the Beis HaMikdash, and once he was Moel B'Hagdish, it was Paka Kiddushasi, the Kiddusha left it. So when Achashverosh wore the Dig Day Kahuna, it didn't left it. But it's very similar to what we said before about the first and second Beis HaMikdash. In Belshazzar used the Kalim of the Beis HaMikdash, boom, everyone saw the Hashgacha. In the second Beis HaMikdash, where the Kiddusha is not so sensitive, it doesn't pop off with Tumah. But as a result, it created a far greater nisayon for Klal Yisrael. Because here, Achashverosh is marching around with the Big Day Kahuna, and no lightning rod comes down to strike him. Yet HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't do that, because if we're going to be on that level, we're going to have that level of Kedusha, where if someone is pogei in that Kedusha, boom, a person speaks a word of nibble pam, bam, bam, explodes. Pitzutz, how does it go, Moshe? What's that, right? He pitzutz, right? So we will never be able to, we'll lose our Kedusha totally, because he won't be on that level. Often the downgrade in our Amunah is HaKadosh Baruch Hu downgrading the Amunah. It's like when the electric company lowers the power. Why are you lowering the power? We're scared there's going to be a blackout. Well, so you're making the blackout. No, because we don't want the whole thing to plot, so we're lowering the power. As I state in the Svarim, this Inyan, there are times that Rabbi Shem lowers our Amunah, lowers our Ruchniistic level, because we are facing such nisyainais that if we were on a higher level and we would blow it, it would totally plots. So the disassembling of the Mishkan is part of the creation of the Mishkan. And really what was happening, the Sfas Emes says with Achashverosh, they had to struggle with this from an Amunah level. It was very hard to understand. How come Achashverosh is not being punished with the Big Day Kahuna? And the HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I'm doing it for your sake. And that was a hachana to prepare them for the second Beis HaMikdash, and the second Beis HaMikdash is a hachana to prepare us for this Golus, where we don't necessarily see the miracles that we will like to see. I heard this beautiful story last night. One of the honorees, one of the Rabbeim, so that one of the other Rabbeim, they give this short video to talk about, they give these wonderful Hespedim people. And so he said that, but it's such a beautiful thing. He said this Rebbe, he wanted to catch up this Rebbe. He said he went to buy a house, and the real estate agent took him to the house, and he walked in, and he sits down by the table, and he starts singing. And like the real estate agent and the seller of the house goes, is he okay? What is he doing? And the real estate agent said to his wife, why is he singing by the table? He's supposed to look around at the house and see, well, that crack will determine what. He says he is testing to see what his Shabbos Miras would sound like in this room. His basis of buying the house or not would depend how the Zmiros would reverberate around. Is this dining room the right size, the right structure? That's his basis in buying the house. That means that it looks like our bodies are the Mishkan, our mind being the Kodesh HaKadoshim, our heart, the Heichel, our digestive system, the Mizbeach, as the Ramah explains it. There's an inyan that your house is the Mishkan. So that's why there's an Indian that the Neira should be on the south side, like the Menorah, and the Chal is on the north side, like the Lechem upon him. And once heard from one of my Rosh Yeshivas, the Svarim Shank in a room should be the Aron Kodesh. And I remember once two of my kids fighting over the Chrein, and boom, the whole thing platzes all over the tablecloth. There was no plastic that Shabbos. And somebody says, "Don't you know that the table's on Mizbeach?" So they go, "Yeah, the Mizbeach had bloodstains all over it." Achas l'mal, l'shevel l'mata. The side of the Mishkan is, and these are the Nisyanis of a house. As much as we would love to have a house, we'll be Kedusha v'Tahara, with all our little children sitting like Malachim by Shabbos tables, and it's always peace, and we see the Malachim come and bench us. It doesn't always work the way it comes with Nisyanis. Like the Mishkan, and there are people that would love to be home and are not home. They're in hospitals, or they're Rachman al themselves, or with others, or just that's part of the Emunah. The craving for the disassembling of the Mishkan is as much the building of the Mishkan as the Mishkan itself. It's all part of it. The Baal Shem Tov once sent a Talmud of his and says, "I want you to learn the highest level of B'tachim without a shtatlis." So he's ready for the shir. "Yes, Rebbe, I'm ready to take notes." He said, No, I want you to watch this. Go to Shmerel. He travels, he comes to Shmerel, comes into Shmerel. Shmerel says, "Yeah, B'tachim without a shtatlis." Me, I don't know what you're talking about. But if you want, we can sit down for supper. You sit down for supper, some dry bread. All of a sudden, boom, boom, what's happening? Door opens up, in walks this shliach of the Paretz, of the local squire, smashes down on the table and says, "Rent is due by tomorrow." And he walks out. What was that? Whatever it is, only negate tomorrow. They continue and they're having a nice time. Comes the next day, boom, the door opens up and walks this monstrosity of a human being, twice his size, smashes down twice. Boom, second time the whole table splits in half. Goes, "You okay? You still have your cottage cheese?" "Yeah, well, most of it anyway, yeah." He goes, what was that?" He goes, "No, that's when the second time means it's due today, later the rent." What happens if you don't have it? The Paretz executes you. Oh, what are you going to do? So it's later today. And all of a sudden they come and they're taking him, and they start walking toward the Paretz. And he's smiling. In the middle, somebody stops him and starts talking to him. And he says, no. And he walks a little further. The guy comes running after him. He goes, no. Finally, he's up in front of the Paretz. The guy comes running. He goes, "Okay." He goes, "What was that all about?" He says, "That was his local, another squire lives down the block. He came to me and says, 'You want to take over my mill? I'll pay you ahead of time.' He says, 'How much?' He made me an offer. I said, no. He comes back, 'I'll give you more.' No. He comes back a third time, says, 'Okay, for that I'll take it.' Then he walks in and puts the money down in front of the Paretz. So he comes back to the Baal Shem Tov. He says, is that a human level to reach in the B'tachim? He says, no. There's Yechidei Adar that reached that level. But I want you to know that there is such a thing. There is such a possibility. Now you have to depend where you are. That's the ultimate goal. Where you are from behind that. Now, it's a very interesting thing. The Arizal says, I think, comes to the Arizal, maybe it's even a Chazal, I'm not sure. Mordechai knew exactly what was happening. Mordechai knew the end of the story. You hear? Mordechai knew the whole Megillah story. So what are you making this whole thing with the crying with the sackle of, come on, Mordechai? You know what's going to happen at the end, right? He knew the whole story. Says the Sfas Emes, but a tzaddik has the ability of saying, Rabbi Shalom, I need you. We say, Rabbi Shalom, I need you when we need the parking space, right? We're willing to give everything. Right? The guy's on a big storm, the ship is about to sink. He says, Rabbi Shalom, I will make such a sudas aidah. I will call all the poor people of the town. There'll be herring and, there'll be kugel and pechah, and it's going to be mamish, a 10-piece meal for thousands. The ship is sinking. The whole town, the whole world. I will give everyone everything. It's going to be moiridik. I'll support my whole town for 30 years. The ship is about to sink. He said, I'm going to make chasana, hundreds and hundreds of poor people with meat and potatoes and everything. Finally, the storm subsided. He goes, okay, God, here's the herring I promised, and, here's the bottle of thing. We lose it. Our connection to the Rebbe Shalom, let's face it, comes when we're under pressure. The nature of the tzaddik is he's on the level where he knows he's not under pressure, he knows the end of the story, but he still has that same level of tefillah to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When you're on that level, says the Sfas Emes, it's Ruach HaKodesh, and that's when HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells you what's going to happen. Because the only reason the Rebbe Shalom keeps it from us, because if not, we wouldn't do tshuva. If not, we'll stay with the herring. But if you're on that level where you feel I need the Rebbe Shalom regardless, then the Rebbe Shalom could tell you the end of the story. So let's try to figure this out. So Lamaisa, things are going the right way for Mordechai, right? He's sitting in sackcloth. Haman shows up. He's turned into a barber because also all the barbers are on strike and the bathhouses are closed, and he's the driver, and Haman is reduced to mamish nothing. And you know what his daughter dumps on him, and he comes in with his car for the emissions test. They say you flunk. He doesn't understand why Haman's mechanic connects it to the other exhaust pipe of the next car and it's not working. And finally they realize it's Haman himself who's flunking the emissions test. You know, like, get out of there, your daughter dumped on you. So basically, Haman is going through the biggest vizyanis. How does Mordechai leave this whole event? Well, why are you crying? This is the turning point in the Megillah. I mean, Haman comes and he says to Achashverosh, you know, he's about, and Achashverosh is one of his moods, and he turns to him, he says, you know, what do you do for a person the king wants to honor? And Haman gives his whole story. He says you put on the king's crown. He sees the king is like cooking. Okay, forget the crown. Okay, but everything else. And he says, well, you do this for Mordechai Yehudi. And Haman turns pale. He goes, which Mordechai? A lot of Matis around. You know, which Mordechai? He says, you know, the Mordechai who sits by the Shar and Ashim. He says, let me just give him 10,000 talents of silver. He says, yeah, do that and this. He goes, you know what, my son will run in front of him. My sons will all run in front of Mordechai. Yeah, do that and this. When my wife forgets, let's give him an island or a country. Yeah, do that and this. We'll give him a cabinet minister position. No, do that and this. And Haman has to stop while he's ahead of the game. So what, Mordechai, this should be a reason for great simcha. Why are you going back al Saki al Tanisai? So the Sfas Emes says a Moedik Yisai. He says the nature of people is when things go our way, you won the lottery. You know, what is it? I once heard a terrible joke. What does a Yid do when he wins the lottery? The first thing he wants to be Matur Nether. Right? You know? That's it. God, I don't need you anymore, God. Whoa! So there's A on the side of winning, we lose it. And on the side of when we hear bad news, we crumble, like, you know, fold up like a cheap camera. The greatness of the tzaddik is he is not so nispoiled by winning the lottery, and he's not so crushed by losing everything he has. That it goes back and forth. He goes to where he is. And you didn't have Meshuna Dikakachas. Somebody was telling me, just a young man, there's a tremendous mechanach, all his children are in chinuch. I said, what's the schus avos? He says his grandfather came here to America at the turn of the century. He was a young man. America was supposed to be paved with gold. They realized afterwards you had to dig a lot of layers to get to that gold. But he made it rich somehow. Somehow he made it rich. And when it was happening in Europe, he was signing affidavits, and he actually sent money to try to bail people out. He sent $10,000 to try to save a family member of his in Germany. $10,000 adjusted for inflation was the equivalent of $100,000, and the money was stolen. It never got to where it was supposed to get. And the man was killed. When he had another opportunity, he took his next $10,000 and sent it. He said, I know the Yetzirah is going to say, what's the point? And I'm going to say, you're not going to get me done. I'm going to try. And he saved the second person. When he came to the third person that he could have saved, he wrote a letter to his father, and he said, I gave everything away. And his father said, so sell your undershirt and raise the next $10,000. And he did. He never got back any of his riches. You know, I would hate to think we should be tested. Right? Imagine, my mother used to say, she thinks about the Yidden in America when she was in the concentration camp. They're reading the paper. They didn't know no one knew what was going on. They're saying, Yidden are being burnt. Ay, Nebuch. Can you pass the butter, please? No, not the margarine, the butter. You know, that's how they would talk in the concentration camp. You know, how many of us would be willing to empty ourselves out, you know, and mortgage our houses? Mike Tress did that. Started out as he was a tremendous executive in the Esquire shoe polish. I don't even remember Esquire shoe polish. I think I remember as a kid. And he was left with he didn't have money for his own tachrichem. Just every last penny he had, mortgage, borrowed. How many of us would be willing to do that? So the word tzaddikim that were on this level. Now Mordechai represented both powers. Haman represented, as soon as Haman got to greatness, he said, now I'm not scared of the Jews, I'm going to kill them. And Mordechai had to be careful on both ends. Just like he had to be careful not to be crushed and not to give up hope and said we're going to daven our way through. He had to be careful when he was risen to greatness that he says the same thing. And basically Mordechai was saying that in this world there are no guarantees. Doesn't make a difference how much money or power you have, and there is no end. It's never a dead end street. That the neshama lives on forever. And that's why Mordechai showed through the time of pain that he fasts, and after the time of godless he fasts. Vasanda says that first he fasted because of the Tsar. He said maybe he was wrong. He should have bowed down to Haman, and afterwards he fasted al Zbusha, but that was the same Inyan. That was the same Inyan. Now it says when Haman came to Mordechai and he was going to tell him, let's go, time for the haircut. So Mordechai is sitting with little kinderlach and he's learning with them. And here comes Haman. Mordechai thought for sure he's going to kill him then. So Mordechai said to the kids, you run, I'll stay here. Now I thought Mordechai knew exactly what was going to happen. So why does the Gemara say he told him run, let him kill me? You knew the end of the story, so you knew you're not going to get killed. So one pshat, the Mordechai knew there's going to be Yeshua for Klal Yisrael. Well, he didn't know how the Yeshua is going to come. Maybe the Yeshua has to come through his own Mesiras Nefesh. So he was ready to do that. And Yeshua comes dafka through Mesiras Nefesh. It says it's Vasenes. Right? Shloim Esther. You know how many years he went to see what's doing with Esther? According to different shittas, when the Vasenes makes a cheshbon, it could have been 3 or 4 years. Every single day, he went to the Shara Nashim. What are you going for? You can't get in. Esther's gone. You're not getting her back. But every day he says, I have to go every single day. I don't see Yeshua, I'm going to go. I'm going to do what I can today. He was never discouraged by the fact that it didn't happen yesterday. So when he said, which Mordechai? He said, the Mordechai that sits by the Shara Nashim, that never gets discouraged. So Mordechai saw 2 things, the Gemara says in Masechtas Megillah. He said there were 2 people that saw things beforehand, and they knew this is an amen for what has to happen later on in life. One is David HaMelech is like walking, he's a nice little shepherd, and a lion comes, everyone runs for their lives, and David is overwhelmed by a gevura, and he's in one of those feisty moods, and gets over to the lion and says, Kimedi, rips him in half. Because what I just do? This must be a message, or later on I have to fight Goliath. And the other is Esther, that when Esther was taken, Mordechai said there has to be a reason Esther was taken. What do these 2 things have in common? Why does the Gemara put them into one as if it's one set? Here you're talking about Gvuri rips apart a lion. Here you're talking about a girl that's kidnapped forever after and forced into a marriage that she doesn't want and has to live with a madman. And the answer is that's precisely the point. Mordechai is saying, whether you're overwhelmed with the Gvura of the Ari, or whether it's the worst possible case of kidnapping, you can't imagine a greater tragedy in the world. Either way, neither the success will make me lose sight of the fact I need the Rabbeinu Shalom, and neither will the ultimate failure. That's how the 2 worked hand in hand. Megillas Esther as a skula to give us a chizik in our life. It reveals Megillah. It reveals Esther what is hidden in our lives. So we messiah with this. It says mishpacha a couple of times. Esther gave up her life. When Mordechai said to Esther, go in. So Esther said, I have this shed. That's what the Rizal says. There's this ghost. I make image of myself. Can I send in the image of myself? No. Why? Because if you're going to save Klal Yisrael, it has to be with Mesiras Nefesh. And Esther says to Mordechai, she secretly would sneak away. They were married. Bas, Mardashin's bias. She would secretly sneak out of Achashverosh, and she was Tevelas, Mecheka Shel Achashverosh, she went to Mordechai. She was able to do that because Mordechai was not a Kayan, and she was technically not being forced. But if she goes into Achashverosh by her own volition, then she's being forced. Then she's doing it, then she's technically becomes Asur and Mordechai forever. So he said, Kasha Avadati, we have no choice. Do we understand the Mesiras Nefesh of Esther? And what does Esther ask in turn? Lech knoises kol Yehudim. I'm willing to give up my life, my family life, my husband forever after, if this is going to bring mishpachas closer together. Because I understand that the ultimate of pain serves as a purpose. It creates the platform even for next year, even for what has to be afterwards. I went to be Menachem Ovel someone. He told me that his mother was sick. She passed away. And they went to the doctor. The doctor said, how long do you have these symptoms? She said, 19 years. And the doctor said, I would say you're a liar, but from the looks of the tests, I have a feeling you're saying the truth. What happened? She said, 19 years ago, she decided that Rabbeinu Shalom, you gave me kids, I'm going to raise them. I'm going to be myself for my kids. I'm putting myself into your hands. She only collapsed after she married off her last child. Again, this is beyond our what we can fathom or even think. The power of Amalek is to destroy families. Reishis Goyim Amalek. He wants to destroy us. The antidote is lehikoil, is mishpacha mishpacha. When you go to an Avos Abanim, I saw the saddest sight I ever saw in my life. I went to an Avos Abanim, I saw a father sitting like this, and I saw the kid sitting like this with his phone. The father and the phone were both talking on phones in front of the Gemara. Okay? We are losing the mishpacha mishpacha. And Esther specifically risked her life. And the skula of Purim is to bring back the mishpacha. That's why it's dafka mishloich monis ishlu reyehu. It's dafka metanis lav yonim. It's dafka unprecedented tzedakah called poishad yad noisim. The answer is, get in there. Esther says, I gave this up for you. And you have a family and you're not spending time with them? What are you doing? That is the art side of Reb Leib Saris. Why was he called Reb Leib Saris? We said the story many times. That the young Paritz's son came rolling by and he saw a young Jewish girl. He said, I'm marrying you. According to law, it was only if she agreed. He insisted that she agreed. So the only thing that could do to stop it was if she officially got married. The only eligible bacher that was available was an 80-year-old Malamed in town, an Alman. And she married him. It was only supposed to be a trick for one night. And the next morning she says she's staying married to him. Her father went out of his mind. What she did not reveal was that he said that he's a hidden tzaddik. And that if she stays, he'll give her a divorce if she wants. They're going to have a child that's going to help Klal Yisrael. And she decided... And that the child that was born, he was one of the famous Talmidei Baal Shem. He was called the head of the hidden tzaddikim. His yard set, I believe, is tonight. Reb Leib Saris. He called himself after his mother's name. Reb Leib Saris, who belongs to Sarah. Because he said it was his mother's Mesiras Nefesh. That's the reason that he's alive. So anyway, just as a schus for all of us to run through this story. There's a person in town. He has a wonderful family. Everything in his life is going his way. But everything in one's life doesn't go his way. And there's a terrible fire one night. And this person, Herschel, everything goes up in flames, and he loses his wife and children. And he runs in to try to save them. They can't hold himself back. They pull him out from the embers of the fire, and they say, what a Rahmanas on him. He's the one that survived. His skin burnt. He looked terrible. He was dying. He was in pain. They did whatever they could for him medically, but when they realized he has no money left because he had no insurance and everything was lost, so it was hard to do things for him. And at the end, he recovered, but he was an awful sight. You looked at him, he was terrible. You couldn't look at him, you couldn't stand next to him. And he wandered from place to place. Even when he came to the town Hegdish, which was the public shelter, everyone ran for their lives. Nobody wanted to be near him. And once he came to the tzaddik of Leib Saris, when he heard he was in town, because he never knew, and he said, the Gabbai, let me in. And the Gabbai was, whoa, whoa, what are you? You know? And the Leib opened the door and called him in. He said, I want to tell you something. As bad as it gets, you should know there's a hashgachim and hashemayim. The Mishkan is reassembled and assembled. There is a purpose and there's a reason. It has to do with who you are in previous Gulgulim. It says, tell me at least why. He says, I can't tell you why. Because this is your Nisayan. He says, Rabbi, what can I do? He says, if you accept additional bezyanis, you're going to have a Yeshua. He says, I want you to go to the town and I want you to do a shidduch. I want you to ask that you marry a certain woman, Miriam Pianavetsha. I'm going to go ask for a shidduch. Look at it. Okay, the Rabbi says to go. He's like, who is this Miriam? This Miriam was a very rich woman that was married to a very rich man. They had a beautiful achnasas archim on Shabbos. They gave thousands of people to eat. And the husband was killed in a wagon crash. And she was left alone. And she continued her big achnasas archim house regardless. Her uncle, who was the Rosh Kol, tried to get her to stop. She wouldn't. Then this Miriam became sick, and she's on her deathbed. And the tzaddik of Leib Saris comes by, and he sits down to talk to her, and he says, she still insists on this achnasas archim house. I mean, look what God did to her. Killed her husband, she's dying. And Rabbi Leib talks to her quietly. He says to her the same thing. He says, you want to have a tikkun? She says, yes. She says, then I want you to marry the person that I'm going to send you one day. She says, fine. But I want to tell you, he is going to be the most ugly, despicable, horrific-looking person you ever saw. And she went, okay. But she asked a good question. How do I know it's him? I mean, every time a Schachter will read me an ugly person, I'll think it's him. So the legend goes of Leib Saris took out a mirror, and she looked in, and she said, she said, you hold this mirror, when you see my image, the Leib's image in the mirror, you'll know that it's him. Anyway, to make a long story short, this guy's wandering from place to place, and he comes to the big town, and everyone's running, they can't bear looking at him. And he spends a Shabbos in this big achnasas archim. Now Miriam, she stood from the top and looked down to some one-sided mirror. And she sees Nebuch, this guy, I can't even look at him, it's so horrible. And it's like disgusting, and afterwards, and he's there, and the whole place is making fun of him, and everyone's running and throwing up and vomiting, and just like, he gets out of there, and finally he comes to her, the Rosh Kol, and the guy says, yeah, well, what, just stand back, what? He goes, I want you to read me a shidduch. I should read you a shidduch, to what? No, don't make fun of me. Okay? Who? To your niece, Miriam Pianavetsha. Why? You want me to read you a shidduch? Now, meanwhile, the uncle walks out, and he just had his big fight with Miriam. Because he's trying to read her shidduchim, and she turns down all shidduchim. And he says to her, why are you turning down every single shidduch? She can't tell him what the Rabbi Sarah said. So she said, I'm waiting for a different kind of a shidduch and I can't tell you. So the uncle is thinking, he goes, you know what, I'm going to fix her wagon. Come over, come on with me. And he takes him over there, and they walk into her house. She sees him coming. She goes, oh, he's coming. With the uncle. My uncle probably wants tzedakah. She takes out her checkbook. She says, Miriam, you know, all along you've been saying you wanted a different kind of a shidduch. He wants to drive the message home. Well, I have a very, very good friend of mine. What's your name again? What do you say? A different kind of a shidduch, right? She storms out angry. How come my uncle embarrassed me this way? She slams the door behind her, and she bursts into tears. And uncle says, okay, I'm sorry. I wanted to drive the message home. And he's saying that shidduch is shemayim. I'm telling you, I know it. He goes, you keep out. It's got nothing to do with this. And finally, she says, listen, I better go out there. My uncle means well. And she wants to wipe her tears out of her eyes. And she picks up a mirror, and she sees the image of the tzad. She gulps hard. She walks out and says to her uncle, I'm masking. Listen, Miriam, you're masking to be Michael me. I understand. You understand. I just want to know I'm masking to the shidduch. You what? I knew it, the shidduch is Mishemaya, and you keep out of this, you got nothing to do with it. What do you mean you're masking to the shidduch? She's masking to the shidduch. He's going out of his mind. And the whole town is like, what? Everyone comes running and screaming, and he says, oh, okay, Miriam, I get it. You're trying to turn the tables on me. Okay. It's a joke, but it wasn't a joke. They got married. He went through a series of operations afterwards, and all of a sudden he turned very different. He went running to the tzaddik of Leif Sari, said, let her be. And when push came to shove, at the end, they continued the Echnas Azarchim house, and they had many children, and Hamshach of Dairis. Esther is the end of all Nisim. Esther shows us, it looks like, in our eyes, it ends in tragedy. Nothing ends in tragedy. It ends in a disassembling of the Mishkan, only for the Mishkan to be reassembled. And understanding Purim correctly is the opportunity of taking the moments in our life where it looks like things are disassembled, and we only reassemble it in a better way.